Good evening, everyone. Wonderful to be together once again for the study of Torah. We are going to go through the portion of Korach, which is a very interesting story of rebellion against Moshe Rabbeinu. And I also want to begin, in fact, by saying that tonight is an exceptionally important event and night in the calendar, Jewish calendar. It is the third day of Tamuz, which is the yahrzeit of the Lubavitcher Rebbe. At Tzaddik, when they pass away, their presence is felt in many ways more than even when they were in their lifetime, in their physical lifetime here on earth. As the Zohar says, Tzaddik dispater mehai alma ishtakich boyatir b'chayahu, that the relationship in the first place was one of soul. And when a person who is a tzaddik departs this world, they're not limited by all the elements of time and place and physical condition. Souls touch so readily and so easily. Certainly a day that we think about leadership and the commitment that the Rebbe had to take the Jewish people, and gives us the impetus and strength today to continue the work to ensure that this world comes to a better place and ultimately to Mashiach, to redemption, which we so desire, and from our hearts is the plea and the call to Hashem to resolve all the issues of the world. So thinking about the Rebbe, we're going to go through a portion that actually talks about the importance of Moshe Rabbeinu, a leader in the Jewish people, and what happens when people inappropriately challenge that leadership. So let's go through the details of the portion. Korach. So he's the first cousin of Moshe Rabbeinu, and he stages a rebellion against Moshe and against Aaron. Interestingly, in this rebellion, he doesn't challenge the fact that Moshe Rabbeinu stood at Sinai and received the Torah. Even if there are Bible critics who say maybe events didn't happen and look, Korach rebelled against Moshe Rabbeinu, he never challenged the fact that Moshe was up on Sinai and received the Torah. He knew that. Nevertheless, he felt that authority should be shared and should be spread, and that it should not be left only for the individual Moshe Rabbeinu. And that's why he began his rebellion. He gathers 250 people together, people of renown. He accuses Moshe Rabbeinu and Aaron HaKohen of power hoarding, or nepotism, that they were giving positions of prominence and importance to their own at the expense of the rest of the Jewish people. They took specific issue with the appointment of Aaron as the Kohen Gadol, and he worked out, Korach did, that in fact, in terms of sons, of brothers, there was a hierarchy, and he should have been the one to have been appointed to that position, more so, he believed, than was Aaron the Kohen. So they would bring incense, an incense offering, and Hashem would reveal his choice for the Kohen Gadol. So there was going to be a test put out. Let's all bring incense and see who Hashem wants, because then Hashem will allow the true leader to be the instrument of Hashem, and the other will not be. Moshe unsuccessfully attempts to dissuade the rebels from participating in this suicidal test. I mean, what was in the balance was not just a position of importance and a job. What was at stake right now was a matter of life and death. Moshe Rabbeinu pleads with Hashem not to accept the incense offered by the rebellious group, that there shouldn't, God forbid, be an undermining of the Jewish people by Hashem allowing their incense to also be received. Korach incites the Jewish people against Moshe Rabbeinu, and he gathers them to witness the grand spectacle. Hashem is angered by the Jews' association with Korach and wishes to destroy them. One of many times, Moshe and Aaron pray on the Jews' behalf, and the decree is averted. Moshe Rabbeinu is always there to defend the Jewish people. What happens now is that the earth opens up and swallows Korach and his family. A major earth opening up, a disaster, and the earth caves in and claims Korach and his family. And in addition to that, a heavenly fire consumes 250 of the rebels. So we have already two different forms of death: the immediate family of Korach being swallowed up by the earth, and 250 people dying by fire. Aaron's son Elazar was to retrieve these incense pans and use them the pans that were the test to see whether Hashem was on the side of Aaron or on the side of Korach. So the pans that held the incense. So the sons of Aaron turned these pans and beat them and make them plates to plate the Mizbeach as a visible deterrent for any individual who might wish to challenge him. So the altar, which was made of copper, was now going to be plated with the copper pans that were used in this test. Then what happens is, again, the community challenges and they blame Moshe and Aaron for the deaths of the Jewish people. Like, why have you caused the death? No ownership, no recognition of cause and effect. And what was the source of death in the camp? It's blamed on Moshe Rabbeinu and on Aaron. Hashem informs Moshe and Aaron that he intends to destroy them in an instant, and a plague struck the nation. Many thousands died. A third form of death resulting from the rebellion of Korach. The earth opened up, and then we had fire, and now we have a plague. Moshe tells Aaron to use a pan of incense to halt the plague. The very thing that introduced and began the problem, the test that showed the problem, was now used to stop the plague. A representative staff for each of the tribes contained the names of the tribe and the princes, not prices, princes. So that there was a stick that had the name of a tribe and the name of the prince of that tribe. And Aaron's name was written on the staff to represent the tribe of Levi. So there were all of these different sticks that would represent the different tribes and the leaders of the tribes. And these staffs were placed overnight in the holies of holies. And miraculously in the morning, Aaron's staff had blossomed with almonds. Miraculously, the stick, which wasn't attached to the ground, nothing was growing, the stick blossomed forth with almonds. Almonds is the fruit that comes first and foremost in the season. When fruit begin to grow, almonds is amongst the first of them. Further proof that Aaron was Hashem's choice for Kohen Gadol. It was actually the pans was the one test, and now was the second test to show that Hashem was with Aaron. This staff of Aaron that showed that he was in fact the true appointee of Hashem is then placed in the holies of holies, where it is to remain for perpetuity. You know that the ark, the holies of holies, was hidden away at the end of the time of the first temple. It wasn't so present in the second temple, but it ultimately will be revealed when the world is redeemed. So that staff was placed into the holies of holies. And we know that in fact there were a few other things there. There was a canister of man, the manna, to remember Hashem sustaining the Jewish people, the miracle of that sustenance. There was also Sefer Torah. There were various items that were placed alongside the ark. Then what happens is the Torah changes the subject and talks about, number 21, Hashem commands the Kohanim and the Levim to prevent unauthorized entry by non-Kohanim. So boundaries, the space, the place, the people who Hashem had chosen should be respected, and boundaries had to be respected. And the Kohanim were in charge with the Levim to ensure that no person who was inappropriate to place, space, or position would reach there. Full stop. The subject changes now. Joy, I'm sorry, I'm going to mute you again. Now Hashem says that there's going to be gifts that would be given to the Kohanim, special gifts. They included certain parts of the sacrifices. There was the 5 shekels for the redemption of the firstborn. There's a portion of grain, oil, and wine, and the first fruit, bikurim, and truma. All these different gifts were identified that would be given to the Kohanim. The Kohanim will not receive a portion of the land of Israel. They receive these gifts from the people, but they don't have their own area of land. They were dependent on the Jewish people for their sustenance. Their space was in the temple. Hashem is their inheritance and portion. The Levim will receive 1/10 of all crops, but no share in the land of Israel. Not the Kohanim and not the Levim received a space, a place, an area that was dedicated for their tribe. They lived in the space of Yerushalayim, or in the time at that time around the sanctuary. They didn't have their own space, but the Jewish people were given the injunction to support the Kohanim and the Levim. The Levim must separate 1/10 of their 10th, the 10th that they received from the Jewish people. 1/10 of what they receive has to be given to the Kohanim, which we call Trumas Maaser. So that's basically a summary of what happens, the rebellion, and right at the end, the importance of the Kohanim and their job, and the gifts that were given to the Kohanim. Let's talk about some of the life messages. So Korach is identified as the individual who is looking for arguments. And in fact, in Ethics of Our Fathers, it says, take a look at the people that have arguments that are for the sake of heaven. For example, Hillel and Shammai often argued about points of law and their opinions relating to a subject matter. There were some heavy arguments, very strong arguments, but there was utmost respect for each other's camps. So whilst Hillel didn't agree with Shammai, and Shammai didn't necessarily agree with Hillel on an issue, in terms of people, in terms of who they were, they respected one another's right to their authority and to their opinion, and therefore there was a constant connection that transcended the division. And that's why we say that machloket, the Shem Shamayim, is Sofel is Kaim. The different opinions remain. Even the opinion that is not the bottom line law and the way that we follow and rule to practically apply according to Shammai or according to Hillel. Let's say Shammai is not the opinion we follow in the bottom line law, but Shammai's opinion is equally Torah. It's something to be studied. It is the word of Hashem. So we study even the opinions that we don't follow because their value in the discussion is an essential part of Torah. As opposed to the argument between Korach and Moshe Rabbeinu is an argument of division, of divisiveness, of personal ego. And therefore, at the end, nothing really remains. Korach's opinion, Korach's thoughts go down into the depths of the earth. They are lost forever. Korach has nothing that really remains. Furthermore, when Ethics of Our Fathers talks about the comparison, the contrast between an argument that is done for the sake of heaven and an argument that is done not for the sake of heaven, it's interesting how it portrays the protagonists. In the case of Hillel and Shammai, it speaks about the argument between Hillel and the person whom he was arguing with, Shammai. But when it talks about Korach, it doesn't say the argument between Korach and Moshe Rabbeinu, it says Korach and his camp, implying that there was an argument between Korach and his camp. Because when there is an attempt to divide and to bring about machlokes, argument, and frustration to the Jewish people, in the end, Korach didn't stand with his camp either. Not only was he arguing with Moshe Rabbeinu, he was at odds with his own camp. Because when it comes to an argument that is centered around ego, at the end of the day, even the positions of the people who seem to be on the same side are not really on the same side. It's like the world of politics. If somebody is your enemy's enemy is your friend. So people make liaisons and form different partnerships just to achieve their purpose and their goal. But at the end of the day, the coalitions that are formed when the intention is to divide and not to build, ultimately the coalitions become the protagonists, become the form of argument. Korach and his own camp were not together because egos don't allow for anybody. They use for their own benefit the coalitions of energies and forces, but they don't really bond with anybody because anybody and everybody gets in the way of my ego. If it's about me, then there's no place for anybody. We might together be fighting a common enemy, but in actual fact, we don't have space for one another either. And that is found in the very first word of this week's portion. It says, Vayikach Korach, and Korach took. And the commentaries explain, what was he taking? Why does it say that he took? It should have said that he enlisted the 250 men. It says he took them with words, says Rashi. He persuaded them. But why does it say the words he took? Because Korach was a taker. That was the very definition of who he was. Some people wake up in the morning and their thoughts are about giving and sharing and impacting and making a difference in somebody else's world and somebody else's life and making the world a better place. The whole drive of joy and happiness in the world is about how can I make the world better? How can I give? And then there are people who wake up in the morning and everyone owes them everything. They're entitled. The world owes them. They deserve. And right from the first breath in the day, it's about how much can I derive, take, and make my life the center and the goal of my own efforts and everyone's efforts around me. Vayikach Korach was the first definition of his motive, that he was a taker. He didn't really come to give anything. And his argument eventually becomes one that is destroyed. And in the end, his own friends, his own people next to him, his own army, his own coalitionists were also part of his enemy. Who did he pair up with? He paired up with Datan and Aviram. Now, this was a partnership. This was a pair of hooligans that are found at the root of every problem that happened in the desert. Datan and Aviram were somehow involved. They came from the tribe of Reuven. And if you look back at history, they were the ones who saw Moshe Rabbeinu right back at the time when he was in the palace. And he went out of the palace and he saw that one Mitzri was smiting a Jew. And he took issue and he killed, Moshe Rabbeinu killed the Egyptian taskmaster and saved the life of the hapless slave. But Datan and Aviram witnessed this, and they went to inform on Moshe Rabbeinu, and that's why Moshe Rabbeinu had to run away from the palace of Paro, and he ended up going to Midian, where he met his wife, and the whole story. But who was the one who informed on Moshe Rabbeinu? Datan and Aviram. They were antagonistic to Moshe and Aaron in Egypt. When it came to the manna, they were told not to go out on Shabbos to collect manna, because the manna would not be delivered by Hashem on Shabbos. They should take a double portion on Friday. The whole reason we have two challahs at the table, to remember, or one of the reasons, to remember the double portion of manna that Hashem gave us in preparation for Shabbos. They go out dafka and they spread manna on the ground on Shabbos so that people would wake up and say, oh, wait, 1 second, manna did arrive. Even Moshe Rabbeinu said it wouldn't, but it did. They caused trouble wherever they could. And now, in this week's portion, they joined Korach. What do we learn, says the Mishnah? Oy l'rasha, oy l'shcheno. Woe to the wicked and woe to his neighbor. And I want to just show it to you graphically. This is how the Jewish people encamped. If you can see it at all, the camp of Israel has 3 tribes in each direction. 3 times 4 is 12 tribes. And in the middle was the sanctuary, and the tribe of Levi, divided into its 3 families, Gershon, Kahat, and Merari. And that's the 3 of the sectors of this middle belong to the 3 families of the Levim. And then the 4th triangle was where Moshe and Aaron was. And right in the middle was the sanctuary, was the tabernacle. So look where Kahos are encamped. They're encamped on this side. And over here you have 3 tribes, Reuben, Shimon, and Gad. Where does Datan and Aviram, the famous rabble-rousers and trouble causers, hooligans, they are from the tribe of Reuven. Where is Kahos from? Where is Korach from? He's from Kahos. So they were neighbors, says Rashi. So this is where you see woe to the wicked and woe to his neighbor. Because if you are kavalapa, if you are too friendly, if you form partnerships with the evil, then you will end up being influenced likewise. That's what happened to Korach. He hung around the tribe of Reuven, but with the riffraff of the tribe of Reuven, Datan Aviram, and that causes his own downfall. Woe to the wicked and woe to his neighbor. Look, they were neighbors right here. Across this line was Reuven, the Datan Aviram, these rabble-rousers, and Korach. We've already explained that this world is divided into givers and takers, and that the first word of Korach, the portion of Korach that we read this Shabbat, is Vayikach Korach, and he took. He emphasized that he was a taker. It was all about himself. It was about his ego. It was about feeding his own interests. He didn't care about anybody else. And the world, as we said, is givers and takers. I just want to mention that today we had the wonderful privilege of taking the blankets that were collected on Lag BaOmer, at our event at Lag BaOmer, and online. There was a collection that happened online. And as a result of that, many hundreds of blankets were collected. They were actually made by, we weren't purchased, we didn't buy them from the store. We utilized the labor of a number of ladies that spend their time making blankets, and that way they feed their own families. So it was a double mitzvah. We employed people to make the blankets, and they fed their family, and then we were able today to give the blankets to those who are cold in winter. We went to the Africa Tikkun Center, Utando, which is just near the Constitutional Court, and we were able to give to hundreds and hundreds of kids. Who did we take? We took our bar mitzvah and our bat mitzvah students and a number of other young people from our shul. Some of the mothers came along with their children, and they experienced the gift of giving. And I gathered the bar mitzvah and bat mitzvah kids together, and I said, when you have a bar and bat mitzvah, there are lots of gifts, lots of presents. And you probably have a hierarchy of which were the better presents and the less good presents and the ones that were really valuable. But when you're older, what's the present that you will remember from your bar mitzvah more than any other? It won't be the present that you received. It will be this present, the blanket that you gave. The present of your bar mitzvah that you gave is going to remain in your mind and in your psyche and in your heart much more so than any of the presents that you got. Because human beings love to give, essentially. We're good. We have a neshama. We love to do the right thing. And therefore we love to give. And when we teach our children that that's important, to give tzedakah, to care, to look and not be entitled and feel that the world owes you and everything is about you and your own bubble, that everyone has to make sure that you're comfortable and that you're oblivious to the pain and the suffering and the needs of others who have less fortune than we do. So important to teach how to be a giver rather than to be a taker. And soon in the middle of August, we're going to go on our bicycle ride for the 23rd time, I think it is. We started in 1998. We've done it every year except for COVID. I watch the students. We hand out stationery, we hand out care packages and food and gifts and treats to people at schools, to hospitals, to orphanages en route. And in the beginning, one often sees the students squabbling over the extra packet of chips that they thought it was theirs. No, it's mine, it's mine, it's mine. And it's about what I can take. And then you see what unfolds is this whole experience and journey of giving. And then I see them squabbling with one another to be the one to be able to give. No, let me take that box. I want to give. I want to give. There is this energy of a desire to give. If we can take our children and teach them not to be takers only, they obviously receive a lot, but not to wake up wanting to be a taker, wake up wanting to be a giver, then we will have taught them how to rise above the challenges of Korach. The Gemara goes into the actual root cause of the opinions and the failures of Korach. It tells us that he had a wife that was constantly niggling at him and saying, Korach, you are so important and you from an older brother and you deserved it more than Aaron. And how could you be satisfied with this? And she egged him on the whole time, wanting him to have a better life, but in so doing, causing his destruction. So sometimes the relatives that are closest to us, and a wife and a husband, who are so well-meaning, can, because of their subjectivity and because of their desire for personal gain and wanting the best for their spouse or for their relative, can actually mislead them from their true interests and cause tremendous havoc. The wife of Korach was a cause of all of his discontent because she constantly said to him, look at you, you're less than, you could be more. Other people are taking away from you and you're satisfied and you're not standing up for your right. She egged him on the whole time and eventually over the edge into destruction. By contrast, says the Gemara in Sanhedrin, there was Oin ben Peles, who was a good guy. He stood up and he did the right thing. And the Gemara relates the various stories of how his wife constantly said, don't stand on ceremony. Don't stand up for your own kavod. No, leave it alone. You don't need this in your life. Why are you letting this worry you? You're bigger than that. You actually don't need. She seemingly was depriving the husband and not pushing him to gain extra wealth, importance, honor. But in the end, she actually did so much for her husband. She taught him how to be satisfied with her lot. So the people closest to us can sometimes cause the biggest harm. And this is why it says, a wise woman builds her home. A woman who's petty and caught up in the silly, inconsequential things will drive her family to the brink of failure because she's not focused on the right things. So let's go into what was driving Korach and what was his presenting questions. So the Gemara says that he challenged the fact that there were mitzvahs that seemed to be irrational. For example, he asked the question, and he had his people come out dressed with tzitzit, and tzitzit have a strand that was made of techelet, special dye. So the question that was asked, if you have the whole garment of your talus dyed by that special dye, do you still need the tzitzit to have that dye? Because the whole garment is. So why would you need the strand that comes from the garment to be of specific requirements if the whole garment has that requirement? And in the same vein, they asked the question, if you have a mezuzah on the door for a home, would you need that mezuzah if the home or the room was completely filled with holy books? When does the parchment of the mezuzah make a difference? When it draws attention to the fact that there's a holy script. But if the whole room is filled with holy scripts, do you still need a mezuzah on the door? Because the doorway is going into a space that has much more than the mezuzah is. Do you need it on the doorpost? And what was he really alluding to? He was saying that there's unique, special people appointed. There's Aaron and there's Moshe Rabbeinu. And they are appointed to be important people over the Jewish people. But why do we need holy people appointed over the people if the whole people is holy? Do you need the strand of the tzitzit to be compliant with a particular requirement if the whole garment is that color of the requirement? And if the whole room is filled with books, why do you need a mezuzah? Why do you need a Moshe Rabbeinu who brings holiness if the whole people of Am Yisrael, the people of Israel, are all holy? So why do we need the special event of a mezuzah or the special detail of the tzitzit? Why do we need a Moshe Rabbeinu if everyone is holy? And he was appearing to be challenging Moshe Rabbeinu because he cared for the people. He said, Kol ha'am kulam kadoshim. Everybody's holy. You are all holy people. Look how holy you all are. Do you need a Moshe Rabbeinu and an Aaron to lord over you and to be an extra degree of holiness? We're all holy. His presenting issue was the fact that the people needed to have more rights. He was a civil rights fighter. He was fighting for the needs of the people. But in actual fact, he didn't care one iota about the people. That was just a subterfuge. He was looking for power himself, but he couldn't stand up and say, I want power. I want it all for myself. I am narcissistic. No, he didn't do that because maybe the people would just push him away. He comes across and he says, this is not about me. This is about you. This is what I want to do for your sake. I want to help you. You're all holy. Do you really need a Moshe Rabbeinu? Do you need a mezuzah on a room that is filled with holy books? Do we need a Moshe Rabbeinu in a people that are all holy? So his agenda was holiness for the people. We're all holy. We all can be Kulam Kadoshim. We are fighting for the rights of the people. But we know from the first word, Vayikach, he was taking it for himself. He had an agenda, and he was completely wrapped up in his own self. He was so narcissistic that he was utilizing and destroying, picking himself up at the expense of everybody else. He only appeared to be caring, and to be a person who is altruistic. And in psychology, when we talk about the altruistic narcissist, he's more dangerous. That narcissist is more dangerous than a person who gets up and proclaims, I want it all for me. It's the person who shares and gives and does all kinds of acts of kindness, but the acts of kindness are only the medium, only the means to be able to get ultimately more for him or herself. It's really narcissistic, but it's using altruism as a method and a means of achieving more for self. That was the personality Korach. He appears to be the liberator, the person who cares for the masses, who wants to make sure that everyone has a chance. Everyone's in this together. That's how he appears to be presenting things. But that's the last thing on his mind. So when we want to discern, when there is somebody who's a narcissist and they're acting in a way that's altruistic, how do we know? Just take a look at their motive. Take a look at what they're really trying to do. Take a look at what the end result of what they are doing. Where's it leading? And ultimately, Korach, his own family, 250 people are gathered around him, and so many thousands of the Jewish people die, either in the ground opening up, or in the fire, or in the plague. And the answer, of course, is that yes, a house full of holy books still needs a sign and a symbol to remind people when they come into the house, when they leave the house, this is the house of Hashem. We need reminders because we can become so used to the books around us that we don't actually have them feature in our lives. Comes the mezuzah at the point where we leave our home and when we enter our home, the transition point between the private and the public persona, the person who's operating within the family and the person who's operating in the public space and public domain of business and work. As we leave from the one domain to the other, there has to be a reminder, who am I? And that mezuzah is the reminder. And Moshe Rabbeinu was the instrument that reminded the Jewish people to be focused on the right things, to be connected to Hashem, to make sure that the important things were the priority. We do need a mezuzah, we do need a Moshe Rabbeinu. Now the question is that the story of Korach follows the story of the spies. And the question is why? The appointment of Aaron had happened months before, and there's no rebellion. Now suddenly there's a rebellion against Moshe Rabbeinu and Aaron. Why suddenly now? Many of the commentaries deal with the fact that it took months for Korach to suddenly realize that he was overlooked and that he should have been appointed rather than Aaron the Kohen. But why didn't he immediately react to it? One of the commentaries explains, quite novel. He says that when Korach heard that Aaron was going to be the Kohen, he thought it was just for the duration of a short while, because they were going to soon be in the land of Israel. Once they came into the land of Israel, there would be a chance for elections. You know, in Israel, we're quite apt at having elections, lots of them. So we would maybe have a new opportunity of appointment. So they thought that whatever was decided was going to be short term. But after the spies came back with a negative report about the land, and Hashem then decrees that they have to be 40 years in the desert, now this appointment of Moshe and Aaron is not just a short-term appointment. This is now going to be for the next 40 years. I can't last being the underling, being the underdog to Moshe and to Aaron for 40 years. That's why suddenly now it became relevant, because it wasn't short-term, this was long-term. So we can deal with short-term challenges, but when they turn into prolonged lifetime events, so that's when Korach couldn't take it anymore. But on a deeper level, there is a reason why Korach's story follows the spies. Last week, we spoke about the spies. We're really significant leaders of the Jewish people coming back with a negative report. And we're trying to understand why would they have failed so dismally last week. And one of the insights on the more mystical, on the Hasidic approach, was explaining that the spies were not oblivious to the fact that God had done miracles all the way through the desert. We explained this last week. Hashem brought manna, and Hashem split seas, and Hashem brought plagues in Egypt. Hashem could destroy the enemy in a sin, the easiest thing. And no generation witnessed the presence of God in their lives miraculously to the degree that that generation in the desert experienced Hashem's presence. So how could the spies doubt that Hashem wasn't going to be able to take them into the promised land and that they were going to be overwhelmed by the Canaanites? God destroyed the Egyptians, a much more powerful nation. Why wouldn't God be able to take care of the Canaanites? So we explained last week that the spies knew that God does miracles, and they knew that when that God does miracles, nothing can stand in its way, because the Egyptians, the sea, anything, when God decides to do miracles. What they were worried about is that when they go into the promised land, they're going to be living in a world that is not governed by the laws of miracles. It would be a natural world. They wouldn't be eating manna every morning delivered miraculously from Hashem. They would have to plant. They would have farms. They would be involved in commerce. They would be involved in the physical elements of a physical world. They were about to leave the miraculous state of the desert, and then they were going to land up in a natural order. In the natural order, how can they just rely on the miracles of Hashem? They were going to have to be worthy. They were going to have to be able-bodied. They were going to have to put in the effort to survive. And therefore they doubted. The spies said, no, this land is going to devour its inhabitants. What do they mean by the land will devour its inhabitants? The physicality, the land, the earth, which we would have to get involved in once we leave the desert, is going to present such a challenge that we're going to be involved with a physical world that will overwhelm us and will be devoured by that earth, by the mundane, by the physicality. We want to stay in the miraculous arena of the desert. That was what the spies were saying, almost like a child about to be born, and the embryo says, I want to stay here. It's warm, I'm fed, I'm taken care of by my mother. I want to stay in the womb forever, because this is where everything just is so perfectly in place. Yeshua and Kalev, the two that argued for going into the land, they didn't say Hashem can do miracles. Everyone knew that. They said leaving the miraculous arena of the desert and going into a world of challenge will afford us the opportunity of greater growth. It's wonderful for the embryo to feel comfortable in the womb of the mother. But if it stays there, it'll never talk, and it'll never walk, and it'll never achieve in its own right. The challenge is specifically the arena in which one is able to grow exponentially greater. It's the world of mitzvahs that is important, not the world of being a recipient of God's miracles. So that's the background to the story of Korach. Once it was established that miracles isn't the ultimate arena where a Jew has to operate, like it was in the desert, but we have to enter into a physical world. And in the physical world, there's a natural order. And the natural order has the guidelines of living mitzvot in a physical world. It's not about going up the mountain. It's not about splitting seas. It's about planting. In that world of mitzvahs, where everyone has to put on tefillin, and all women have to light candles, and we all have to give tzedakah, and we have to put mezuzah on our doors. Why is one Jew more important than another? In the arena of the desert, when Moshe Rabbeinu is the conductor of the supernatural miracles, I understand why Moshe Rabbeinu has to play his role, because he's the Superman. He's the conductor of the miracles. But now that you've told me that that's not the ultimate goal, says Korach. Now you told me to go into the promised land is the ultimate goal, where we work according to the natural order and we fulfill mitzvahs, and then everybody does mitzvahs. It's not about who goes up the mountain, and not about who relays the word of Hashem miraculously. We all engage with godliness and with Hashem by doing practical mitzvahs. So why is Moshe Rabbeinu more important? A house full of books, a Jewish people full of people who have a capacity to do the mitzvahs of Hashem. Why is Moshe Rabbeinu important? If that's the arena. That's why the rebellion happened now. Because once the spies came back and it became evident that the change of a new world was important, and that was the arena of coming close to Hashem, they said, in that world, we don't need a Moshe Rabbeinu. We need a Moshe Rabbeinu to go up Mount Sinai and to split the seas. But we don't need a Moshe Rabbeinu to put on tefillin. We can all put on tefillin. So what role does he play? And again, the answer was yes, a room full of holy books needs a Moshe Rabbeinu. We still need to be attached to the soul, to the core, to be reminded of what's the priority so that the earth doesn't devour us. Guess what happens to Korach? It's not a coincidence. Korach challenges Moshe Rabbeinu. He distanced himself from Moshe Rabbeinu. He feels that Moshe Rabbeinu is usurping his honor and glory and that of the Jewish people. That was just a subterfuge. But what happens to Korach? Exactly what the spies said would happen. If we get involved with the physical elements, the land will devour us, the physical will devour us, the mundane, the earth, the things that relate to the physical world will overwhelm us and devour us. And the world devoured Korach. That's exactly what happened. The earth opened up and did exactly what the fear of the spies was. Because the only way we can engage the physical and be masters of it rather than being swallowed by it is when we're true to Moshe Rabbeinu, when we're true to the Torah, to the servant of Hashem who guides us, when we are true to the leader of the Jewish people, and we are recognize the importance of the leadership role that that person plays, the Moshe Rabbeinu plays. Then we can encounter the physical and master it rather than being mastered by it. So how appropriate and how clear the connection between last week, where the fear was we're going to go into the physical elements and we're going to be devoured by it, and the next week, Korach, misguiding the Jewish people and being devoured by the earth. Exactly what the spies had feared. So it's certainly a day in which a week in which we think about the preeminence, the importance of having a leader and being connected to a leader and having guidance and a person who looks at a generation and says, this is how the generation is able to build out of the ruins of the past and find a way forward. Bring us back to the point that we started on, Gimel Tamuz. We think about the leadership of the Rebbe as described by Jonathan Sachs. He said a good leader has followers. A great leader creates leaders. And the Rebbe took a Jewish people that had come out of the Holocaust and were, in all intents and purposes, destroyed and gutted. And there was very little hope. And he turned it into a dynamic movement where there's more than 5,000 centers scattered all over the world. Just this week or last week, the last 2 weeks, a mikveh was built in Ghana, in Africa. Nobody expected Africa to be a place that a magnificent, beautiful mikveh would be built, because they're Jews there too. And the Rebbe's army was concerned about that. So it's certainly a week in which we read about the importance of the role of Moshe Rabbeinu and being connected to that kind of leadership that guides the moral consciousness of a generation, enables us to encounter physical world with success. But if, God forbid, we detach ourselves from that central importance leadership, the Moshe Rabbeinu that is found in each and every generation, then we are left without the support and the strength to be able to encounter the world and not be swallowed by it. We're reaching the time of 8 o'clock. I want to wish everyone a beautiful Shabbos, a beautiful Chodesh. Today was we're just coming out of the first days of the month. Yesterday was the first day of the month of Tamuz. May Hashem give us beautiful seasons of joy and happiness and clarity and boker. That was the point that Moshe Rabbeinu said in the morning, we'll see which of the staffs are going to sprout with the almonds, which is how Hashem miraculously showed that Aaron was the true leader, the true Kohen Gadol. But the imagery is boker, in the morning we'll know, when the light breaks through the darkness, when Mashiach comes and allows the world to see the world as it should really be, will be clarity for everybody. May that boker, that morning, not only the morning then in the desert, but the morning that we yearn for and we look for every day of our lives, and ultimately the morning and the dawn of the redemption of the world, may come a moment sooner. Have a beautiful Shabbos and a beautiful Chodesh.
Thank you, Rabbi. Same to yourself.
God bless.
Thanks, Rabbi. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining.